The alert did not come with a sound. It came with a color, a single line of amber light pulsing across a wall of midnight blue screens. Roman stood motionless in the center of the room, surrounded by the soft, rhythmic whisper of 1,000 cooling fans. The data center was a cathedral of glass and steel, buried deep beneath the city, where the temperature never changed and the air tasted of ozone and sterility. He stared at the screen. 30 years of listening to the deep, and now the word, detected. 3,000 miles away, the storm had just finished rewriting the shore. Carter stepped out of his shack into a world that had been rearranged. The volcanic rock of Isla de Sombra was black and jagged, 1,000,000 years of violence fossilized in basalt. The beach was a graveyard of kelp and twisted steel, the aftermath of a tempest that had howled for 3 days. He walked the new shoreline, boots sinking into sand that had been churned by the fury, his breath visible in the cold, salt-heavy air. He saw the glint immediately, not the dull sheen of driftwood or the rusted patina of metal. This was a sharp, geometric reflection, a hard line of light cutting through the grey morning. It came from an object half buried in wet kelp, something with edges too straight, too perfect to belong to this broken world. Carter stopped walking. The feeling of being watched crystallized into a single, focused point. Back in the server room, Roman's finger hovered over the confirmation key. The coordinates on the screen were impossible. The signal was coming from a place that shouldn't exist, Blackwood Shoal, a splinter of volcanic rock erased from every modern chart, a custodian's graveyard where things were sent to be forgotten. He pressed the key. The screen flashed. Signal locked. Retrieval protocol initiated. Carter knelt beside the object. It was a casket, 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, made of a material that looked like glass but felt like something else entirely. No seams, no hinges, just a single poured form, warm to the touch, humming with a vibration that travelled up through his boots. Inside, a milky occlusion swirled, revealing the suggestion of a silhouette, and etched into the surface a serial number, AET7. The ocean had kept this secret for 30 years. Now, 2 men were waking it up. One had built an empire to find it. The other had been paid to never look. The casket had chosen its beach, and the clock was already ticking. The island doesn't have a name on any modern chart. In the old shipping ledgers, they called it Blackwood Shoal, a splinter of volcanic rock 20 miles from the nearest trade route. The air here smells of salt and sulfur, a permanent exhalation from the thermal vents that steam along its eastern ridge. The sky is a perpetual ceiling of low, fast-moving cloud, the color of old bruises. Carter has been the only human resident for 7 years. He is not a warden. The word implies purpose, authority. He is a custodian of debris. His job, dictated by a contract signed in the lawyer's office he will never see again, is simple. Walk the shore each morning after a storm. Document what washes up. Bury it, burn it, or push it back into the deep. Ensure it remains forgotten. In return, a sum of money is deposited into an account he never touches. His silence is purchased in perpetuity. His home is a shack built from the bones of a ship that foundered here decades before he arrived. The walls are timber gone soft with damp, patched with sheets of corroded aluminium. Inside, there is a cot, a wood stove, a radio that only receives static, and a single shelf of books whose pages have swollen with humidity. He knows their stories by the feel of the warped spines. His life is a study in attrition. The wind scours the paint from his walls. The salt rusts every nail. He is being slowly erased, and some days he finds a grim peace in that. The storm that changed everything was not like the others. The fishermen on the mainland would call it a 100-year event. For Carter, it was a 3-day siege. The wind did not howl, it screamed, a sound that felt personal, as if the storm had come for him specifically. The shack trembled on its foundations. He spent the hours listening to the structure protest, waiting for the roof to be peeled away like the lid of a tin. When the silence finally came, it was deeper than any he had known. Not an absence of sound, but a presence of stillness so complete it felt like pressure. He stepped outside at first light. The geography of his world had been rewritten. Familiar rock formations were gone, swept into the sea. New ones, raw and sharp, had been thrust upward from the seabed. The beach was a graveyard of strange, deep-water kelp and the shattered carapaces of creatures that never see the sun. The violence was absolute. But as he walked the new shoreline, his boots sinking into the rearranged sand, a different sensation crept over him. It wasn't fear. It was the feeling of being watched. Not by a person, but by the change itself. The air felt charged, expectant. The island, for the first time, felt like a stage. And he was not the performer. He was the audience, waiting for the curtain to rise. He scanned the devastation, his eyes moving from one piece of wreckage to another. A length of twisted steel, a waterlogged crate, the pale, bloated trunk of a mangrove tree ripped from some distant estuary. And then he saw it. A glint. Not the dull sheen of wet wood or seaweed. This was a sharp, geometric reflection, a hard line of light cutting through the grey morning. It came from an object half buried in a tangle of kelp 20 yards down the shore. Something with edges that were too straight, too perfect, to belong to this broken world. Carter stopped walking. The feeling of being watched crystallized into a single, focused point. It was coming from that spot on the beach. He took a slow breath, the air cold in his lungs, and began to move toward the impossible geometry gleaming in the wreckage. The closer he got, the more the object defied the logic of the shore. It was a casket, 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, but it wasn't wood or metal. It appeared to be made entirely of a thick, transparent material, glass, but not glass. It had no seams, no hinges, no visible lock. It was a single, poured form, like an insect trapped in amber. The storm had thrown boulders the size of cars, yet the surface of the casket was flawless. No scratches, no chips. The water from the retreating tide didn't sheet across it. It beaded up into perfect, trembling spheres and rolled away, as if the material itself repelled the ocean. Carter knelt beside it. The cold of the wet sand seeped through his trousers. He reached out a hand, his fingers hovering an inch above the surface. He expected the chill of crystal. Instead, he felt a gentle, radiating warmth. A hum, so low it was more vibration than sound, traveled up through the soles of his boots. The object wasn't dead. It was dormant. He leaned closer, peering into the cloudy interior. The transparency wasn't perfect. A milky, frosted occlusion filled the casket, allowing only the suggestion of shapes within. A silhouette, long and narrow. Humanoid, but wrong. The proportions were off. The head seemed too small, the limbs too straight, as if they contained reinforcements, wires or bones of a different kind. Then he saw the markings. On the side, near what he assumed was the head, a sequence was etched into the material itself. Not scratched, but formed from within, like a flaw in a diamond. A serial number. AET7. And beside it, a symbol. A circle bisected by a single, vertical line that ended in a stylized arrowhead. Carter's breath caught. He knew that symbol. He'd seen it stamped on crates that washed up years ago. Crates he'd been paid to sink in deep water. It was the old insignia of Thorn Meridian, Roman's first conglomerate. But this version was archaic, from the company's earliest, most secretive days, decades old. His first instinct was primal. Push it back. Shove this impossible, humming thing into the surf and let the sea have it. That was the protocol. That was safety. But his hand didn't move. The warmth from the casket was now a palpable pulse against his palm. The hum in the ground seemed to sync with his own heartbeat. Curiosity, a sensation he had methodically starved for years, uncoiled in his chest. It was a physical ache. This wasn't debris. It wasn't lost cargo. It was a message, and it had been delivered, with terrifying precision, to the one place on Earth designed to ignore messages. To him. He stood up, his joints protesting. The weight of the decision settled on him. To report this was to break his contract, to invite the world he had fled back onto this shore. To not report it was to live with this silent, watching presence forever. As if sensing his conflict, the casket responded. The internal, frosted cloud began to swirl, like milk stirred in black tea. The pale silhouette inside seemed to shift, and the low hum escalated, climbing in pitch to a distinct, rhythmic pulse. A heartbeat made of light and resonance. Thump, thump, thump. It was a signal, and it was now active. Carter looked from the casket to his shack, to the radio inside that connected him to nothing. But some doors, once opened, cannot be closed by simply walking away. The casket had chosen its beach, and now it was choosing its messenger. He turned and walked back to the shack, not with the slow trudge of routine, but with the grim purpose of a man walking to a gallows. He had to use the emergency channel, the one he'd never tested, the one that would sever his last tether to silence. Inside the shack, the static from the emergency radio was a physical presence. It was the white noise of his isolation, a constant, hissing reminder of the empty world beyond the waves. Carter stared at the old, boxy unit. Its single green power light was the only colour in the dim room. Using it was the one action his contract explicitly forbade outside of a true, life-threatening crisis. A storm wasn't enough. A broken leg wasn't enough. This, he knew, was the line. His hand was steady as he lifted the heavy microphone. The warmth from the casket still lingered in his palm, a phantom sensation. He keyed the transmitter. "Mayday. This is Blackwood Shoal Custodian. Do you copy?" The static hissed back, unchanged. He released the button, waited, then tried again, reciting the string of numbers that were his designation, not his name. "Mayday." GT7 with the old primary sigil. There was a pause, longer this time. When the voice returned, the synthetic tone seemed to carry a new weight. Stand by. Do not approach. Do not attempt interaction. A retrieval party is en route. Maintain position. Acknowledge. Acknowledged, Carter whispered. The connection severed. The static rushed back in, louder than before, as if to fill the space left by the interruption. The waiting began. He returned to the beach, but he didn't sit in the shack. He brought his rifle, an old bolt-action thing he used to scare off the aggressive gulls, and took up a position on a high rock 20 yards from the casket. He wasn't guarding it from the sea. He was guarding it from the sky, from whatever was coming. As the hours bled into the afternoon, the casket's behavior evolved. The rhythmic pulse synchronized with the fading light. As the sun dipped, internal illuminations cycled on deep within the frosted core, a warm amber at first, like a pilot light, then shifting to a cool, pulsating blue that cast long, eerie shadows across the wet sand. It was breathing. It was waiting, too. Sitting there in the growing chill, the rifle across his knees, Carter understood. This wasn't a coffin for a body. A body didn't need a power source. A body didn't emit a resonant frequency that tuned itself to the geology of the island. The energy output, the flawless preservation, this was a containment field. It was a prison for something volatile, or a sanctuary for something incredibly precious. The silhouette inside was incidental, a byproduct. The real treasure was the stable, humming force that kept it intact against decades of ocean pressure and the violence of the storm. The sound, when it finally came, was not of boat engines. It was a deep, rhythmic thrumming that began as a vibration in the fillings of his teeth, then grew into a physical pressure in the air. He looked up. The low cloud cover, usually impenetrable, began to churn. A vortex of mist opened like a wound in the sky. Through it descended a shape. Not a helicopter with rotors, but a sleek, matte black aircraft with dual sets of tilting engines. It moved with a predatory silence, a ghost of composite materials and impossible engineering. It was a machine from the future, landing on a shore from the dawn of time. The downwash flattened the kelp and sent stinging spray across Carter's face. He didn't blink. He kept his eyes on the hatch that hissed open in the aircraft's flank. The retrieval party had arrived, and it consisted of one man. Roman stepped onto the black sand of Blackwood Shoal. He was not what Carter had expected. The man who emerged from the aircraft was not a corporate titan swaddled in arrogance. The technical gear he wore was worth more than the island, a matte grey environmental suit that seemed to drink the dull light. But the face inside the hood was eroded. It was the face of a man who had solved every problem except the one that mattered. Haunted, hollowed-out fatigue lived in the lines around his eyes. This wasn't a retrieval. It was a pilgrimage. Roman moved past Carter as if he were another piece of driftwood. His focus was absolute, a laser line drawn directly to the casket. He walked with a strange, reverent haste, his boots leaving deep, deliberate prints in the wet sand. He stopped a foot away, close enough to touch it, and simply stared. For a full minute, he didn't move. He just looked at the humming, blue-lit object as if reading lines of text on its surface. Carter watched the billionaire's shoulders. They were rigid, but not with power. With a tension so acute it looked painful. The wind tugged at Roman's hood, but he didn't seem to feel it. Finally, Roman reached out. He didn't put on a glove. He peeled back the cuff of his suit and placed his bare palm flat against the warm glass. He closed his eyes. His entire body shuddered. A single, violent convulsion that had nothing to do with the cold. When he opened his eyes again, they were bright with a terrible, focused anguish. He wasn't here to salvage an asset. He was here to visit a grave. He turned then, and for the first time, his gaze settled on Carter. It wasn't the look of a boss assessing an employee. It was the look of one survivor recognizing another in the aftermath of a crash. There was no superiority in it, only a shared, exhausted understanding of cost. "You're the custodian," Roman said. His voice was low, gravelled by lack of sleep and something else, a grief worn smooth by time. It wasn't a question. Carter nodded, lowering the rifle but not setting it down. I reported the marker, AET-7. Roman's eyes flickered at the designation, a wince quickly suppressed. "You followed protocol. You shouldn't have had to." He looked back at the casket, his voice dropping almost to a whisper. "It shouldn't be here. It was never supposed to come to the surface." "What is it?" Carter asked. The question hung in the salt air, a challenge to the silence of 7 years. Roman was silent for so long Carter thought he wouldn't answer. He just stared at the pulsing blue light, his reflection a ghost in the frosted surface. "It's a failure," he said finally. The word was heavy, final. My father's failure. Project Ethelgard. An attempt to preserve consciousness before the great stagnation of the body. A lifeboat for the mind. He turned back to Carter, and the raw truth was there, unmasked. "They told me it was lost, that the test flight went down in the Atlantic Trench, that the pressure would have crushed it, that the core would have degraded. They gave me a flag and a plaque in a corporate lobby." He took a step closer to the casket, his hand still hovering near it. "But I built the search algorithms anyway. I built listening posts on the ocean floor. I waited for a signal I was told was impossible. For 30 years. He looked at Carter, and the billionaire vanished, leaving only a man holding a single, fraying thread. The storm must have shaken it loose from a sediment layer, activated the beacon. It heard my network pinging the deep, and it answered. His voice broke. It answered. Carter understood then. The silhouette inside wasn't a stranger. It was the reason for the empire. It was the ghost in the machine. Roman wasn't the creator. He was the son who had been left behind, building a world capable of hearing a whisper from the abyss, just on the chance it was still there. Roman's composure, the steel facade, was a thin veneer over a profound terror. He was not afraid of the technology. He was terrified that after all this time, after building an entire world to find it, he would open the casket and find the data corrupted. That the silence inside would be absolute, that the soul he was trying to save had already dissolved. "It's not a coffin," Carter said, not as a question, but as a realization. Roman shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving the casket. "No, it's a cradle, and I am 30 years late for the christening." "The law of salvage," Carter said, his voice finding a strength that surprised him. He didn't move from his rock. "It's clear. Finder's rights. You can't just take it." Roman slowly turned from the casket. The anguish in his eyes hardened into a sharp, assessing focus. He wasn't used to being told no. "The asset belongs to the company." "I'm not talking to the company," Carter said, nodding towards the silent, futuristic aircraft. "I'm talking to the man who flew it here. You didn't send a team. You came yourself. That means this isn't corporate. It's personal." He gestured to the humming glass box. "You want it? You tell me what I'm giving up. What's inside that's worth a 30-year search?" A war played out on Roman's face. The instinct to command, to buy silence with a number so large it would be a weapon, clashed with the desperate need of the man beneath. He looked from Carter to the casket and back. The island's oppressive silence pressed in, a third party to their negotiation. "It's my brother," Roman said finally, the words leaving him like a confession dragged from a deep well. "Elian, the silhouette you saw. Project Ethelgard was his idea. My father's resources, but Elian's mind. He was the architect. He believed we could map a consciousness, that we could archive a soul before the body failed. He was dying. A neurodegenerative disease. It was a race." He walked a few paces away, his back to Carter, staring out at the violent sea. The test flight was a deception. It wasn't a plane. It was a submersible, designed to sink to a stable, cold layer of the deep, where the core could remain in stasis indefinitely. "The salvage rights," Carter said, his tone softer now. "I'll sign them over, for free. But I open it with you. I stood watch. I get to see what the sea brought back." Roman studied him, looking for the trap, the angle. He saw only the weathered resolve of a man who had nothing left to lose but his curiosity. After a lifetime of complex deals, this simple bargain disarmed him. He gave a single, curt nod. "All right, but you follow my lead. The containment protocol is delicate." They approached the casket together. Roman produced a device from his suit, a flat disc he placed against the surface near the etched serial number. It glowed, and intricate, hair-thin lines of light spread across the glass, revealing a hidden network of seals and conduits beneath the surface. It was biology and circuitry fused into one. "The lock is a 3-part key," Roman explained, his voice clinical now, a shield against the emotion. "A biometric print, a genetic sample, and a spoken passcode in the subject's own vocal pattern." He pressed his thumb against a specific node. The light grid flared green. He pricked his finger with a tool and let a single drop of blood fall onto another node. It was absorbed instantly, the light flashing amber. Then he leaned close to the casket, near where the head would be. His voice, when he spoke, was different. Younger, softer, mimicking a cadence that wasn't his own. "Elian, the bridge is not the shore." The casket reacted. The deep, resonant hum shifted pitch. The internal blue light intensified, brightening until the frosted interior began to clarify. The swirling opacity dissipated like mist burning off in a morning sun. For the first time, they could see clearly. It was not a body, not in any traditional sense. Suspended in a web of faint golden light within the crystal matrix was a human form, but it was translucent, schematic. A glowing, intricate map of neural pathways and synaptic connections, a ghostly echo of a brain and nervous system rendered in 3 dimensions. At its center, where the heart would be, pulsed a compact, dense core of swirling silver light, the preserved consciousness. The silhouette was just the shadow this energy cast, and resting on a pedestal below this shimmering ghost was a simple, physical object. A child's kaleidoscope, its brass tube tarnished, its cardboard eyepiece frayed. Roman made a sound, a choked inhalation. All the clinical detachment vanished. "He took it," Roman whispered, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his cheeks. "I gave it to him. When we were boys, he said it was how he saw the world, broken into beautiful, impossible patterns." He was no longer a billionaire at a retrieval. He was a little brother, seeing a forgotten treasure. The casket was not a lifeboat for a body. It was an ark for a memory, and the kaleidoscope was the anchor. The key to the entire impossible machine was a 30-year-old piece of childhood wonder. The seal, now broken, began to release its final safeguard. The words echoed in the new silence. "The bridge is not the shore." The casket's internal symphony of light and sound didn't just stop, it inverted. The resonant hum, a constant presence for hours, ceased so abruptly it left a ringing void in their ears. In its place came a new sound, a high-pitched, crystalline whine that seemed to emanate from the air itself, a sound that vibrated behind the eyes and made the teeth ache. The glass, which had been warm and pulsing, began to frost over from the inside. A latticework of delicate white cracks, like frost on a winter window, spiderwebbed across the inner surface. The beautiful, shimmering ghost of Elian's neural map began to dim, its golden light receding into the dense silver core. "It's the failsafe," Roman said, his voice tight. The tears were still wet on his face, but his mind was already racing ahead of the crisis. The final seal wasn't mechanical, it was a philosophical lock. The passcode didn't just open it, it initiated the final transfer sequence. We have minutes before the matrix destabilizes and the archive degrades into thermal noise. It needs a new vessel. He was moving before he finished speaking, barking commands into a wrist-mounted comm. The hatch of his aircraft hissed open again, and a compact, autonomous drone floated out, carrying a sealed case. It glided over the sand, setting the case at Roman's feet with unnatural precision. He opened it. Inside, nestled in black foam, was a device the size of a hardback book. Its surface was a smooth, dark composite, featureless except for a single recessed port. It was the successor. The thing Roman's empire had been built to create. A stable quantum lattice, ready to receive a ghost. "The interface is acoustic," Roman said, his hands moving with a surgeon's certainty as he connected hair-thin filaments from the device to nodes on the casket's now cracking surface. The original mapping used harmonic resonance to listen to the brain's electrical fields. We have to reverse the process. Play the song back to the new instrument. But the casket was dying. The frost on the glass thickened, obscuring the interior. The high-pitched whine escalated, becoming a shriek of stressed crystal. The environment itself seemed to rebel. The wind, which had been a constant whisper, rose to a howl, tearing at their clothes. The waves, previously rhythmic, began to crash against the shore in erratic, violent bursts, as if the sea sensed the unraveling of a deep, old secret. Roman's tools were useless. The sophisticated probes and laser calibrators he attached to the casket's ports flickered with error codes. The system was collapsing in on itself, following a 30-year-old protocol designed for a quiet lab, not a storm-racked shore. He ripped a sensor from a port, his breath coming in sharp gasps. The billionaire was gone. The engineer was gone. All that remained was the desperate brother. He abandoned the case. He placed his bare hands directly on the freezing, cracking glass, over the spot where the silver core of light was fading like a dying star. "Elian!" he shouted, not a command but a plea, his voice raw against the wind. "I'm here. I'm right here. Come back, just come back." He slammed his palm against the casket, not in anger, but in a frantic rhythm, trying to transmit a pulse, a heartbeat, anything through the failing medium. Carter watched, rifle forgotten at his side. He saw the moment Roman's desperation shifted into a terrifying, intuitive understanding. Roman closed his eyes, ignoring the shrieking casket, the howling wind. He began to hum. It was a low, tuneless, shaky sound at first. Then it found a pitch, a resonance. It was the same foundational frequency as the casket's original, comforting hum, but filtered through a human throat, imperfect and alive. He hummed, and he pressed his forehead against the freezing glass, as if he could push the memory of his brother's mind directly from his own. The casket's death shriek faltered. For a second, the whine dipped, harmonizing with Roman's ragged voice. The frost on the glass stopped spreading. In that window of stability, the featureless black device on the sand came to life. A soft, blue light pulsed from within its core. A thin beam of coherent sound, inaudible to them, lanced from its port and into the casket. It was listening. It had found the song. With a sound that was not a crack but a sigh, the release of a breath held for 3 decades, the main seal of the glass casket gave way. Not explosively, but with a gentle, hydraulic hiss. The lid didn't open. A quarter of the side panel simply detached along hidden seams and slid down into the sand, revealing the chamber within. There was no blast of gas, no dramatic reveal, just the sudden, intimate stillness of an opened secret. The wind dropped to a murmur, the waves receded, the shrieking stopped. The autopsy was complete. The memory had been transferred. The opened chamber exhaled a scent. It wasn't the rot of the sea or the sterile tang of a lab. It was ozone and lily, the smell of lightning hitting a high meadow, of purity preserved under immense pressure. The air inside had been waiting. Roman didn't reach for the shimmering, schematic ghost of his brother's mind. That silver core of light was already unraveling, its data stream siphoned into the humming black device on the sand. His eyes were locked on the simple, physical object that had anchored it all. The kaleidoscope. He reached into the casket with a reverence that bordered on terror. His fingers, steady through the crisis, now trembled as they closed around the tarnished brass tube. He lifted it out as if it were made of spun glass. The weight of it in his hands seemed to pull him down. He cradled it, staring at the faded floral pattern on the cardboard eyepiece. "This was mine," he whispered, the words barely audible. "He won it from me. A bet. I said the old oak by the lake would fall in the next storm. He said it wouldn't. It didn't." A faint, broken smile touched his lips. He kept it. He said it was his good luck charm, that it showed him the blueprint of the universe. As he held the artifact, the black device on the sand completed its work. With a soft, chime-like tone, the silver core within the casket winked out. The ghost was gone, transferred. But in the same instant, the device projected a beam of light into the air above it. It wasn't a hologram of data or a recorded message. It was a memory, raw and unfiltered, pulled from the very lattice of the preserved consciousness. It was a moment. They saw a room. A clean, white, sun-drenched room from 30 years past. A young man who was unmistakably Elian, though his face was gaunt from illness, sat in a chair by a window. He held the kaleidoscope up to the light, turning it slowly. His voice, thin but clear, filled the quiet of the beach, speaking to someone off camera, To the younger Roman holding the recorder, "The mistake, little brother, is thinking you need to build a bridge to the other side. You don't. The bridge is the fear of the water. The shore is the faith that the pattern continues, even when you can't see it." Elian lowered the kaleidoscope and looked directly at the recorder, his eyes bright with a pain that wasn't physical. "I'm not going to a cold, dark place. I'm going into the pattern. My pattern. And your job isn't to bring me back. Your job is to make sure the pattern keeps turning. To build a world beautiful enough that if a piece of me is still spinning in the glass, it will recognize the light." He smiled then, a genuine, weary smile. "And if it doesn't work, if this is just a very expensive, very complicated way to say goodbye, then look through this for me. See the beautiful, broken pieces, and know that I saw them too." The projection faded. The light from the device dimmed to a steady, gentle pulse. The memory was safe. The final message had been delivered. Roman stood frozen on the black sand, the kaleidoscope clutched to his chest. The recorded words hung in the air, not as a revelation, but as a confirmation of a truth he had spent decades running from. He hadn't been chasing a ghost to resurrect it. He had been building a world to honor a pattern. The weight of his misunderstood mission, the empire, the isolation, the relentless forward drive, collapsed in on itself, leaving only the profound, simple grief he had been too busy to feel. A ragged, gasping sob broke from him, then another. He didn't weep quietly. He crumpled, folding in on himself as if punched in the gut, landing on his knees in the wet sand. He cried with the ugly, unfiltered anguish of a boy who had just understood, 30 years too late, what his brother had actually asked of him. It was the sound of a dam, meticulously constructed from steel and silicon, finally giving way. Carter did not move to comfort him. He did not speak. He understood his role in this final act. He was the witness. He stood his ground, a silent sentry against the vast, uncaring landscape, guarding the one place on earth where the most powerful man in the room was allowed to be utterly, completely broken. In that shared silence, the gulf between the billionaire and the fisherman vanished. They were just two men on a forbidden shore, united by the aftermath of a mystery the ocean had finished with. One was mourning a brother. The other was remembering what it felt like to be needed, even for just a moment, as a keeper of something more than silence. The storm of grief did not last long, but its passage was absolute. The raw, gasping sobs subsided into shuddering breaths, and then into a hollow, spent silence. Roman remained on his knees in the sand, his head bowed, the kaleidoscope pressed against his forehead as if in prayer. The rain, which had held its breath, began again, a fine, cold mist that slicked against his matte black suit and mixed with the salt tracks on his face. When he finally moved, it was with the slow, deliberate care of a man whose internal architecture had been demolished. He did not stand up. He simply sat back, letting the wet sand take his weight, and stared at the open, empty casket. The glass was just glass now, a beautiful, inert shell. The magic was in the black box and in the tarnished toy in his hand. He looked at the kaleidoscope, turning it over in his palms. His thumb found the worn groove of the focusing ring. With a movement that seemed both instinctive and deeply symbolic, he lifted it to his eye and pointed it toward the grey, light-diffusing clouds. Carter watched. He saw Roman's shoulders, which had been knotted with 3 decades of tension, drop another inch. A soft, almost inaudible sigh escaped him. He wasn't seeing broken glass and coloured beads. He was seeing the blueprint. After a long minute, Roman lowered the device. He didn't look at Carter, but his voice, when it came, was clear, stripped of its corporate gravel and its recent anguish. It was just a voice. He was right, Roman said, more to the sea than to the man beside him. I built the bridge. I spent my life constructing the most magnificent, pointless bridge imaginable. I thought the goal was to reach the other side, to pull him back. But the other side was never a place. It was a state of understanding. He finally turned his head, his eyes red-rimmed but calm. He didn't want a rescue. He wanted a witness to the pattern. And I was so busy engineering the rescue that I forgot to look. He pushed himself to his feet, movements stiff. He walked to the black data device, its light pulsing steadily. He didn't pick it up with triumph. He picked it up like a recovered family album, its value sentimental, not strategic. He placed it carefully back into its case alongside the kaleidoscope. Then he turned to the casket. He placed a hand on its cool, open edge. "Thank you," he whispered, though whether he was speaking to the machine, to his brother, or to the sea that had returned it was unclear. It was a gesture of closure. He looked at Carter then, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time as a person and not an obstacle. "You asked what was inside," Roman said. "It was an instruction manual, one I've been misreading for 30 years. He gestured to the island, the shack, the endless grey horizon. "You live on the shore. You understand the patience of the water, the faith that things return or they don't, but the pattern continues." Roman zipped the case shut. The act was final. The retrieval was over. The mission, however, had just been redefined. "I have to go. This data, it needs a quiet place. Not a lab, a library." He took a step toward Carter, then stopped. The offer of money, of a new life, was clearly on his tongue, the automatic transaction of the wealthy, but he swallowed it. He saw the rifle leaning against the rock, the weathered lines of Carter's face, the quiet sovereignty in his stance. This man had not stood guard for a paycheck. "The island," Roman said instead. "It's yours. The contract is void. The company that paid you, it doesn't exist anymore. It hasn't for years. You were a line item in a legacy trust, watched over by an algorithm." He gave a faint, weary smile. "I think I was too." He extended his hand, not for a business shake, but palm open, an offering of truth. "You're not a custodian of debris anymore, Carter. You're just a man on an island. The choice of what to watch over is now yours." Carter looked at the offered hand, then out at the empty casket, soon to be swallowed by the tide. He understood then that his role was not to possess the secrets, but to midwife their return, to stand on the shore and bear witness to the moment the ocean decided a story was over. He looked back at Roman, at the profound exhaustion and the new, fragile peace in his eyes. Carter did not take his hand. Instead, he gave a single, slow nod. It was acknowledgement. It was enough. Roman's hand dropped. He understood. Some salvages are not transactions. They are recognitions. He picked up the case, its weight now purely physical, and turned toward the waiting aircraft. The wind from its engines had already begun to stir, flattening the grass. He didn't look back as he climbed inside. The hatch sealed behind him with a definitive thud. The aircraft's engines cycled up, the sound a rising whine that shattered the island's natural silence one last time. It lifted vertically, a dark scar against the clouds, then pivoted and shot south, disappearing into the mist within seconds. The silence it left behind was different. It wasn't the tense, waiting silence from before the storm. It wasn't the heavy, grief-laden silence of the last hour. This was a clean silence. A silence after a question has finally been answered. Carter was alone again. He walked to the casket and placed his hand where Roman's had been. The glass was cold now, truly cold, returning to the temperature of the sea and the air. It was just a thing, a beautiful, empty thing that had finished its work. He sat down on his rock, picked up his rifle, and laid it across his knees. He wasn't guarding anything. He was just sitting, watching the waves begin to lick at the base of the glass shell, as they had done for 1,000,000 years before it arrived, and as they would do for 1,000,000 years after it was gone. The collapse was complete. Not a destruction, but a settling. The Titan had fallen, and in his place, 2 simpler men remained, one flying home and one already there. The rain filled the empty casket. It began as a soft ticking on the glass, then became a steady pour, turning the open chamber into a shallow, clear pool. It reflected the grey sky perfectly, transforming the relic into a simple, elegant mirror lying on the black sand. The storm had delivered it, and now the weather was reclaiming it, not with violence, but with patience. Carter watched the water rise inside. He made no move to tip it, to save it. Its purpose was served. It was now the most significant piece of debris he had ever catalogued, and he chose the simplest protocol. Let the sea have it back. An hour later, he returned to the beach. The tide was coming in. A strong wave finally lifted the glass shell, buoyant with its pool of rainwater. It rocked once, twice, then the next surge pulled it free from the kelp. It floated for a surprising moment, a crystal coffin turned life raft, gleaming under the diffuse light. Then, a larger wave took it, rolling it gently and submerging it. It didn't sink dramatically. It drifted, just below the surface, a fading ghost of solid light, moving with the current away from the shore, back to the deep, where all unfinished things eventually go. Carter watched until it was a mere shimmer, then nothing at all. The spot where it had rested was already smoothing over, the sand rearranging itself under the lap of the waves. In a day, there would be no sign anything had ever been there. He felt no loss. He felt a quiet completion. The island's secret had been a borrowed one. It was now returned. The island was just an island again, a lonely, beautiful, difficult place. And he was just a man on it, by choice, not by contract. That night, he lit the wood stove. The damp timber fought him, but he coaxed the flame. He took one of the swollen books from the shelf, not to read, but to feel the warped cover in his hands. The silence in the shack was his own. It was not purchased, it was earned. The gulls, tentative at first, returned to their perches on the roof. The wind settled into its old, familiar roots around the shack. The island's silence reasserted itself, but it felt different now, less like a prison sentence, more like a sanctuary he had quietly inherited. Rain fills the empty glass, turning it into a mirror for the sky. The sea keeps nothing forever. It only borrows our secrets until we are strong enough to ask for them back. If you find yourself drawn to the edge of things, subscribe. More stories wait at the tide line.